There are moments in life when a quiet whisper moves through the soul, a whisper that feels like a warning carried on a wind no one else can hear. It comes without thunder, without noise, without any dramatic sign, yet something inside knows that a truth has been disturbed. A boundary has been crossed. A private conversation has taken place in the shadows where your name was spoken without honor. There is a strange tension in the air when this happens, a spiritual heaviness that does not come from fear but from revelation. It is the sense that something hidden has just been dragged into the light, not by human hands, but by a higher power that observes every secret exchange and every deceitful whisper. And when this revelation arrives, it becomes clear that their private chat about you was never as private as they believed. For nothing escapes divine awareness. Every word that was used to mock you, every lie spoken to confuse others about your character, every attempt to twist your kindness into weakness began to move in a circle far beyond their control, returning to them with a weight 10 times heavier than the harm they intended. For a long time they believed they were untouchable. They believed the image they crafted would protect them. They believed their charm, their manipulation, their carefully managed persona would keep them safe behind the curtain where they could play both victim and hero. But the truth is that a person cannot build an identity on deception without eventually being crushed by it. What they said about you in that private conversation was not simply gossip. It was a spiritual violation, a deliberate attempt to distort your light, to portray you as unstable, dramatic, confused, bitter, or obsessed. They hoped those words would travel, sink in, and take root in the minds of others, shaping an image of you that matched the story they needed in order to maintain control. Yet the universe refuses to reward cruelty disguised as concern. The spiritual world refuses to honor actors who pretend to be angels while spreading poison behind closed doors. There is always a moment when the unseen becomes seen, and that moment has finally arrived. The most painful part was not hearing what they said. It was realizing that they had waited for the perfect moment to deliver their script, as if every insult required rehearsal. They took their time, planned their phrasing, made sure their tone would sound believable, calm, rational, and even compassionate while painting you as the unstable one. They spoke slowly, confidently, as if narrating a documentary about your flaws. They wanted the listener on the other side of the screen to believe them without hesitation. And for a moment, perhaps the message landed. Perhaps the new supply nodded quietly. Perhaps someone else agreed with their version of the story. But spiritual truth does not depend on temporary appearances. Whatever lie they planted began to crumble the moment it left their lips, because deceit spoken against someone who walks in sincerity never survives for long. The punishment was already set in motion, not by your anger, but by natural law. The law that returns to each person the harvest of the seeds they sow. There is a reason the atmosphere around you has felt so different lately. A shift has taken place, not because you fought for justice, not because you exposed anything, but because the false story they tried to build has collapsed under its own weight. When they spoke about you in that private chat, they did not consider that truth listens. They did not consider that intentions cannot be hidden. They did not consider that the spiritual consequences of degrading an innocent heart arrive without delay. They thought the conversation was harmless, a moment of venting, a way to bond with someone new by tearing down someone old. But what they created was a doorway for their own destruction. Every insult became a chain. Every lie became a stumbling block. Every false accusation became a mirror reflecting their own darkness straight back at them. They are now walking through the results of their own choices, and the devastation they face is not random. It is a direct response to the harm they tried to inflict upon a soul that carried no malice. What truly terrifies them now is the realization that the people they tried to impress are beginning to see through the performance. The charm no longer covers the inconsistency. The excuses no longer explain the chaos. The sweet tone no longer hides the bitterness behind it. Their private chat has resurfaced, not through screenshots or exposure, but through the unraveling of their mask. The new supply senses something is off. Friends who once believed them now pause before accepting their version of events. Even their closest allies cannot ignore the spiritual imbalance surrounding them. They feel cornered by a truth they cannot escape. Your name is no longer a tool for manipulation. It has become a reminder of everything they tried to destroy but failed to control. They are surrounded by consequences, overwhelmed, burdened, and shaken. The punishment they triggered has multiplied, and they cannot understand why everything is collapsing so quickly. But the answer is simple. They underestimated the strength of a heart that never wished them harm. They underestimated the reach of divine justice, and they underestimated the power of truth spoken through silence. As you read this, a quiet strength begins to settle around you, because you finally understand that the battle was never yours. You did not need to defend your reputation. You did not need to chase explanations. You did not need to prove your innocence. Every attempt they made to harm you has turned into a lesson for them instead. They thought exposing you would elevate them. Instead, exposing you exposed them. And now they sit in the aftermath of their own choices, devastated by a punishment they never believed would arrive. But this is only the beginning of the revelation. Something deeper is unfolding, and the next truth, waiting to be uncovered, will change everything for them. There is a certain silence that follows betrayal, a silence different from ordinary quiet. It feels heavier, almost alive, as if the air itself remembers what happened even when you try to forget. This silence appears when something that should have remained sacred has been violated. When someone who once smiled at you begins to speak with the tongue sharpened in secrecy. It is the silence that arrives when you discover you were discussed behind closed doors. Not with honesty, not with respect, but with the subtle cruelty of someone who enjoys watching your character unravel in the eyes of another. The moment you sensed this shift, your heart knew the truth long before your mind could explain it. A disturbance moved through your spirit because betrayal always creates a sound, even when it is whispered. What they did in that private conversation was not casual. It was intentional, designed, and carefully crafted to reshape the story so they could emerge as the misunderstood hero while you became the unpredictable antagonist. They used selective details, twisted memories, exaggerated emotions, and false concerns meant to look wise or compassionate. Their words were a performance, spoken slowly for maximum effect, as if each sentence were a thread weaving a new narrative to replace the real one. They spoke about your reactions, but never their provocations. They described your boundaries, but called them emotional extremes. They talked about your silence, but ignored the pain they caused. They painted themselves as the calm one, the rational one, the victim who survived your imagined storms. This is how narcissists rewrite history, not through truth, but through performance. Not through understanding, but through manipulation. Not through honesty, but through hidden conversations where the audience is unaware. They are being recruited into a false story. What they failed to recognize is that every lie carries a weight. Every distortion creates a debt. Every insult spoken in private becomes a seed planted in soil that does not forget. When they delivered that message about you, they opened a spiritual door they were not prepared to walk through. The energy behind their words was not neutral. It carried intention. It carried desire for control. It carried a hunger to be admired and believed. and heaven responds to intention long before it responds to appearance. People may have applauded them for their calm tone or their convincing explanations, but the spiritual realm listens only to truth. It knows what was hidden beneath the smile. It knows what was disguised as concern. It knows exactly what they were trying to accomplish by reshaping your identity into something that served their ego. You were never meant to be their shield, their emotional sponge, their reputation fixer, or their silent scapegoat. But they had grown comfortable using your kindness as a stage where they could stand taller while pushing you lower. When you stepped away from their chaos, they felt their image slipping. They felt the narrative losing structure. They felt the center of attention drifting away from their control. So they acted quickly. They rushed to redefine you before anyone could see the truth for themselves. They whispered strategically. They messaged discreetly. They told half-truths decorated with false sincerity. They crafted a version of events where they were wounded and you were unstable. And for a short moment, they believed they had succeeded. Yet something unexpected happened. The same people they tried to influence began to feel uncomfortable without knowing why. The energy around the narcissist darkened slightly. Their confidence became too polished. Their explanations felt overly detailed, overly defensive, overly rehearsed. The listener began to sense that the story did not match the speaker. It is difficult for deception to maintain harmony, because lies create vibration where truth creates peace. That vibration exposes itself slowly, softly, quietly, until even the most convincing story begins to crumble from within. The person they tried to impress started noticing contradictions. They noticed how the narcissist spoke too eagerly when tearing your name apart. They noticed that your supposed instability did not match the calmness you displayed. They noticed that the narcissist's behavior did not mirror their claims. And spiritual law continued working. What was whispered in the dark began unraveling in the light. Meanwhile, the narcissist did not understand why everything suddenly felt wrong. Their confidence weakened. Their plans lost stability. The attention they were seeking slipped away. The person they tried to recruit began pulling back. Conversations felt tense. Their charm no longer produced enthusiasm. Their excuses felt weaker. This is the spiritual response when someone tries to tear down an innocent heart. The punishment is not fire falling from the sky. It is exposure carried through natural consequence. It is truth revealing itself through the quiet discomfort of those who hear the lie. It is the unraveling of the mask, the collapse of the performance, the return of the harm they released multiplied in intensity. You have been feeling a strange peace lately, a peace that does not come from understanding but from recognition. Your spirit recognizes justice when it begins to unfold. Even if your mind cannot explain it, you feel the shift. The weight that once pressed on your heart is dissolving. The confusion once placed upon your name is lifting. The fear of being misunderstood has disappeared. You are no longer carrying the emotional burden they placed upon you. It is returning to them, piece by piece, until the full weight of their deception settles on their own shoulders. This is not vengeance, it is divine balance. It is the return of spiritual energy to its rightful place. And now something even more significant is happening behind the scenes. A new revelation is forming, one they never expected. It is not about what they said, it is about what they hid. And that truth is moving toward the surface with unstoppable force. There comes a moment in every spiritual battle when the unseen begins to reveal itself. Not through loud signs or dramatic events, but through a quiet shift that cannot be explained by natural logic. This moment arrives when the truth is finally tired of being buried, when deception has stretched itself too thin to hold its own weight any longer. The narcissist who once felt invincible now feels exposed without understanding why. The private conversation they used to shape a false version of you has begun collapsing in on itself. And every person who heard their story now senses that something is deeply out of place. This is the hour when their own words return to them, not gently, not softly, but with a force multiplied beyond what they ever intended. When they messaged someone about you, they believed it would grant them sympathy, admiration, or validation. They imagined the listener would be impressed by their strength, charmed by their composure, or moved by their fabricated sadness. What they could not imagine was that the conversation itself would become the starting point of their downfall. They thought they had successfully handed someone a portrait of you painted with exaggerations and distortions. But spiritual truth has a way of peeling the paint back layer by layer until the original image becomes visible again. And now the listener sees you differently. They begin comparing what was said with what they observe. They recognize inconsistencies. They sense duplicity. They notice the narcissist speaks with too much pleasure when portraying themselves as a victim. They notice the eagerness, the dramatics, the slight pride they take in playing the misunderstood one. This shift unsettles the narcissist deeply. Their charm was once enough to shape the atmosphere in any room, but now the room feels heavy when they speak. Their explanations once drew sympathy easily, but now they draw confusion. Their stories once made others lean in, but now those same people lean back with hesitation. The narcissist feels this change like a cold breeze across the spine. They cannot understand why their strategies no longer work. They cannot understand why the person they tried to impress is suddenly distant. They cannot understand why their words feel weaker, emptier, and less believable. But the spiritual world understands perfectly. Their own words have returned to confront them, and the energy behind those words will not let them rest. You may not know the details, but your spirit has sensed this unfolding. You felt it the moment your peace returned. You felt it when the emotional weight that once held your chest so tightly finally lifted without warning. You felt it when you stopped defending yourself in your mind, when the need to explain or justify disappeared. That is what happens when heaven steps into a situation. The burden shifts off the innocent and settles onto the guilty. What once drained you is now draining them. The anxiety they placed on you is now circling them. The confusion they created is now clouding their own paths. Every wrong intention they directed at you has returned, multiplied tenfold, settling over their life like a storm they cannot outrun. Meanwhile, the person they shared that private conversation with is beginning to see the truth they never intended to reveal. The narcissist exposed themselves without realizing it. In their eagerness to portray you as unstable, they accidentally displayed their own instability. In their attempt to make you look reactive, they revealed their own fear of being abandoned. In their effort to gain admiration, they showed how desperate they are for attention. The listener now hears something underneath their words, something they ignored before. It is the unmistakable sound of insecurity, jealousy, and resentment. And once someone notices this tone, they cannot unhear it. From that moment on, every future conversation sounds different, heavier, forced. The narcissist senses this shifting energy and panics internally. They try harder to maintain the story. They add more details. They change small parts of their narrative. They attempt new angles to justify their behavior. But every new explanation contradicts the last one. Their story becomes fragmented, inconsistent, confusing even to themselves. This is how lies collapse. They do not fall apart all at once. They crumble slowly, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the truth they tried so desperately to hide. And the truth, now making its way to the surface, is something far more devastating than a mere exposure of their words. It is an exposure of their intentions, the part they believed would never be seen. And now something else is happening beneath the surface. The person they spoke to about you is starting to feel protective of you. They sense there is more to your story. They feel drawn to your calmness, your silence, your dignity, your refusal to retaliate. Your character reveals itself without effort, while theirs reveals itself only under pressure. This comparison becomes a mirror that exposes everything the narcissist tried to hide, and it leaves them shaken, confused, and terrified of what might be revealed next. Because what comes next is not just consequence. It is the unveiling of a truth they feared more than anything else. A truth that will shift every relationship, every alliance, every impression, and every lie ever spoken about you. There is a moment in every hidden story when the truth begins to push through the surface like a seed breaking open under pressure. It happens slowly at first, quietly, almost invisibly. But once the process begins, it cannot be stopped. This is exactly what is unfolding now. The narcissist who once felt confident enough to speak about you in secret now senses that the foundation beneath them is beginning to shake. They replay the private conversation in their mind, revisiting each phrase, each exaggeration, each carefully crafted insult, and something inside them tightens. The same words they once delivered with arrogance now return to them like warnings, echoing with a heaviness that did not exist before. Their spirit recognizes what their mind refuses to admit. They invited a consequence they are not strong enough to carry. But the unraveling does not begin with loud confrontation or public exposure. It begins with small, subtle shifts that nibble away at their confidence. People who once believed their performance now hesitate before agreeing. Friends who once accepted their explanations now listen with skepticism. Even the new supply, who was once eager to align with them, now feels an uneasiness they cannot explain. The narcissist senses this change like a drop in temperature. It makes their words heavier, their stories harder to tell, their lies more difficult to maintain. They try to remain calm, to appear unbothered, but a quiet panic grows inside them. They worry someone will ask a question they cannot answer. They worry someone will compare stories. They worry someone will recall a contradiction. They worry someone will notice how quickly they tried to turn your name into a weapon. What intensifies their fear is the silence coming from your direction. They expected you to react. They expected anger, retaliation, a defensive explanation, maybe even an emotional outburst. They created a narrative that depended on your response to validate their claims. But you did not react the way they anticipated. You remained calm. You remained distant. You remained grounded in truth. And nothing unnerves a narcissist more than a person who refuses to dance to their manipulation. Your silence exposes the noise in their spirit. Your peace contradicts the chaos they tried to create. Your dignity reveals the insecurity behind their attacks. The contrast is blinding, and the listener sees it clearly now. Every day that you stay silent is a day their story weakens. Every moment you remain calm is a moment their mask cracks. Every step you take forward in your healing is a reminder that their attempt to destroy your reputation has failed. Your peace is a testimony they cannot erase. And now the people they tried to influence begin to reconsider everything. If you were as unstable as they claimed, how are you still so grounded? If you were as emotional as they described, why does your presence feel so steady? If you were as dramatic as they insisted, why are you the one walking in clarity while they walk in confusion? Questions like these grow quietly in the minds of those who heard their story. Curiosity becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes awareness. Awareness becomes truth. The narcissist feels this shift even when no one says a word. They sense eyes observing them differently. They sense the change in tone when people respond. They sense the unspoken doubt in the room, and so they scramble. They try to correct their story. They retell it with slight adjustments. They add more details to sound convincing. They drop new hints to reinforce their narrative. But each adjustment exposes them more. Each addition contradicts something they said earlier. Each desperate attempt to control the narrative makes them appear more defensive. This is the unraveling they cannot escape. Once deceit begins collapsing, every attempt to save it only accelerates its destruction. Meanwhile, the person they confided in is wrestling with an uncomfortable realization. They recall the way the narcissist described you. They compare it with what they observe. They see a disconnect that grows larger each day. Something in their spirit warns them that the narcissist is not being truthful. They begin noticing patterns they once ignored. They see how often the narcissist complains about others. They see how every story ends with them as the victim. They see how quickly they shift blame. They see how easily they twist facts. And worst of all, they notice a kind of pleasure in their voice when they talk about your supposed flaws. That pleasure exposes everything. It reveals envy. It reveals resentment. It reveals insecurity masquerading as justification. And when someone sees the truth behind the narcissist's behavior, they cannot unsee it. They begin distancing themselves quietly. They stop reacting with enthusiasm. They respond with shorter messages. They offer fewer compliments. Their spirit backs away even when their words remain polite. The narcissist senses this withdrawal instantly. It terrifies them. They fear losing control. They fear losing admiration. They fear losing the only audience that once believed their narrative. And fear makes them reckless. They start making mistakes. They start saying too much. They start revealing their true emotions. They start exposing themselves in ways they never intended. At the same time, your presence begins to shine in unexpected ways. People feel calmer around you. They sense sincerity in your spirit. They observe genuine humility, strength, and emotional maturity. Your silence speaks louder than their accusations. Your healing speaks louder than their performance. Your resilience exposes the fragility of their ego. You are becoming the mirror that reflects the truth they tried to distort, and everyone sees it, including the narcissist. What follows is the part they fear most. When someone begins to see the narcissist clearly, they also begin to see you clearly, and that clarity reveals the full extent of the narcissist's deceit. The truth that is forming now is far larger than a single conversation. It is a revelation of character, intention, and everything they tried to hide. The unraveling has only just begun, and what is coming will shake their entire narrative to the core. There is a turning point in every story of spiritual injustice when the truth no longer whispers but begins to rise like a tide, steady and unstoppable. This is the moment when the atmosphere around the narcissist becomes charged with a pressure they cannot explain. A pressure that tightens around their choices, their words, and their hidden intentions. They feel watched, though no one is watching. They feel exposed, though no one has confronted them. They feel unstable, though they insist everything is under control. This is what happens when the energy of truth begins closing in on deception. It does not arrive with noise. It arrives with increasing discomfort. A discomfort that grows every time they remember the private conversation that started everything. That conversation was supposed to protect their image, but now it stands as the very doorway through which consequences have entered their life. The narcissist never believed their words would return. They spoke with confidence because they thought those words were safe behind screens and locked devices. They thought messages would disappear, calls would be forgotten, and lies would dissolve into the air like smoke. But spiritual law does not lose track of anything. Every attempt to tarnish your character, every effort to reshape your story, every false detail they added to make themselves appear innocent was captured in a place far more permanent than memory. Now that energy returns to them multiplied in weight, and the impact is far heavier than they expected. Suddenly, the people around them sense something off. Their charm feels weaker. Their excuses feel overused. Their explanations feel desperate. It is not one event that causes this shift. It is the slow tightening of truth, inch by inch, around every lie they told. What frightens them most is the shifting behavior of the person they confided in. The listener who once believed their story now moves differently. Their tone is cooler. Their responses are shorter. Their curiosity has turned inward. They replay the narcissist's words, comparing them with observations they can no longer ignore. They recall how passionately the narcissist described your flaws, and now they wonder why such passion was necessary. They recall the dramatic way the narcissist explained your emotions, and now they wonder why so much effort was spent crafting the story. They recall the tone of satisfaction that slipped out between sentences, and now they wonder what kind of person enjoys diminishing someone who is no longer present to defend themselves. These questions gather quietly, forming a new understanding. And that understanding becomes the mirror the narcissist never wanted to face. The narcissist panics internally. They feel their influence slipping. They sense admiration fading. They feel the energy shift in every conversation. Their words do not land the same way. Their stories do not generate the same sympathy. Their attempts to maintain control now look rehearsed, strained, and unnatural. They try to charm, but the charm falls flat. They try to justify themselves, but the justification raises more questions. They try to redirect attention, but the attention keeps returning to the one thing they hoped would stay hidden: their dishonesty. It is as if the universe has illuminated every corner they tried to keep dark. Their fear intensifies when they notice something unexpected. Your name begins to evoke curiosity rather than judgment. People speak of you with interest, calmness, and even admiration. They mention your strength, your peace, your maturity, your ability to endure without retaliation. They notice your silence not as weakness, but as evidence of a deeper truth. And as your character becomes clearer, the narcissist's lies crumble even more quickly. Their fear transforms into frustration, their frustration into anxiety, and their anxiety into a kind of desperation they cannot hide. While they are spiraling, you are rising. Your clarity grows. Your emotional stability strengthens. Your spirit becomes lighter, as if the weight that was once placed on you has finally returned to its true owner. People see the difference. They notice how you carry yourself. They notice how you speak with humility, not bitterness. They notice how your energy feels clean, steady, and grounded. They notice the calmness in your presence, the softness in your words, the sincerity in your spirit. This contrast becomes impossible to ignore. You are the truth, standing quietly while the narcissist tries to outrun their own shadow. But something even deeper is unfolding now. The person who listened to the narcissist's private message is beginning to feel guilty. Not because of anything you did, but because of what they now recognize. They realize they trusted the wrong voice. They realize they judged you without knowing you. They realized they were used as an audience to validate a lie. This realization creates a shift in their heart, a shift that pulls them away from the narcissist completely. They no longer want to hear the story. They no longer want to participate in the performance. They no longer want to be part of the deception. This silent withdrawal terrifies the narcissist because it signals that the narrative is crumbling beyond repair. Their fear becomes so intense that they begin making frantic mistakes. They message too often, they overshare, they offer explanations no one asked for. They bring up your name unnecessarily. They try to predict what others are thinking. They attempt to reshape the story again, but each attempt exposes a new layer of insecurity. Their mind becomes restless. Their sleep becomes shallow. Their emotions swing between false confidence and sudden dread. This is the internal collapse of someone who cannot escape the consequences of their own manipulation. Your absence is their greatest fear now, because your absence forces the world to evaluate the truth without distraction. Without you present to blame, their behavior stands alone. Without you present to contradict, their contradictions become obvious. Without you present to react, their manipulation cannot breathe. And so the truth rises, slow but unstoppable, revealing the reality behind their words, their actions, and their intentions. What comes next is not just consequence. It is the moment when the person they tried to deceive begins to seek the truth directly. And when truth is sought sincerely, it always reveals far more than anyone expects. There comes a moment when the truth no longer waits quietly in the background. It steps forward, steady and unshaken, and exposes everything that was whispered behind closed doors. What was once hidden in private messages, silent schemes, and secret conversations suddenly rises to the surface like something pushed upward by a divine hand. In this moment, the narcissist begins to feel a weight they cannot explain, an uneasiness they cannot shake, and a fear they cannot silence. Because every attempt to damage your name, every plan to turn others against you, every mocking conversation meant to humiliate you has now circled back to them in a way they never expected. When Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13 says that nothing is hidden from the eyes of the one who sees all, it speaks directly into this season. The darkness they created around you has become the darkness surrounding them. The words they used to belittle you have turned into the words others now use to question them. The twisted stories they spread so carelessly have begun to fall apart in the very hands of the people they tried to impress. Their private chat about you, once filled with arrogance and mockery, has now turned into the very reason doors are closing against them. The same people they tried to impress with cruelty now look at them with suspicion, disappointment, and quiet judgment. Actions have returned home to their sender. The narcissist never imagined this moment. They believed their charm would protect them. They believed their false confidence would cover every flaw. They believed that speaking boldly and speaking loudly would make every lie sound like truth. But now, they stand in a place where their voice no longer carries the same power. The room that once applauded them has grown silent. The audience that once admired them has grown distant. Their influence weakens, not because someone attacked them, but because the truth finally revealed what their words tried to hide. This is often the subtle but powerful way divine justice moves. It does not always strike with thunder or lightning. Sometimes it simply reveals what was already there. It allows others to see the intentions behind the mask. It uncovers motives that were quietly destructive. It shines a gentle but undeniable light on the difference between truth and manipulation. And when this light shines, people who once stood beside the narcissist take a single step back, then another and another, creating a space that the narcissist can feel but cannot understand. Proverbs chapter 26 verse 27 says that whoever digs a pit will fall into it. The narcissists spent months, maybe years, digging pits of rumors, deception, and subtle cruelty around your life. They thought they were clever. They thought they were strategic. They thought that if they shaped enough opinions against you, they could control the entire narrative. But now, the pit feels deep, and they feel the ground shifting beneath their own feet. Not because someone pushed them, but because the pit was never meant for you. It always belonged to the architect. This season exposes more than their behavior. It exposes their fear. They fear losing their image. They fear losing their audience. They fear losing admiration. They fear losing control over how others see them. This fear grows louder each day, echoing inside them like footsteps in an empty room. They replay conversations over and over, wondering who exposed the chat, who repeated their words, who revealed what they had said about you. They point fingers, they accuse, they scramble. But the truth is simple. The moment they chose deceit, consequences began writing themselves. Even now, they remember how confidently they typed messages about you, how boldly they spoke against you, how casually they predicted your downfall, how easily they laughed at the thought of you suffering. They believed the conversation would stay hidden forever. But divine justice does not work in shadows. It moves in timing, purpose, and clarity. It waits until the exact moment when the truth will have the greatest impact. And now, the narcissist stands face to face with the result of their own actions. A result multiplied far beyond what they ever expected. Their devastation does not come from losing you. They never valued what they had. Their devastation comes from losing the false power they built on your name. Every insult they use to elevate themselves now lowers them in the eyes of others. Every rumor they started now becomes a rumor about their own character. Every judgment they whispered now becomes the judgment others speak about them. And every attempt to destroy you has become a mirror reflecting their own heart. Romans chapter 12 verse 19 reminds that vengeance belongs to the Lord. The narcissist never believed this. They believed they could control outcomes. They believed they could shape truth. They believed they could escape consequences. Yet now, as doors close and relationships weaken, they begin to understand what they never wanted to face. Divine timing has arrived. And when divine timing arrives, it arrives completely. But your story is different. While they scramble, you rise. While they hide, you heal. While they panic, you find peace. While they question, you find clarity. While they lose connections, you gain direction. This contrast is not accidental. It is a chapter written with precision. It reflects the beauty of restoration and the power of protection that has surrounded you in ways you never fully realized. Still, another truth is approaching. Another revelation is on its way. Something even more significant is unfolding, and you may feel it in the quiet moments. Stand still. Something important is about to be revealed. There is a certain silence that follows betrayal. A silence different from ordinary quiet. It feels heavier, almost alive, as if the air itself remembers what happened even when you try to forget. This silence appears when something that should have remained sacred has been violated. When someone who once smiled at you begins to speak with the tongue sharpened in secrecy. It is the silence that arrives when you discover you were discussed behind closed doors. Not with honesty, not with respect, but with the subtle cruelty of someone who enjoys watching your character unravel in the eyes of another. The moment you sensed this shift, your heart knew the truth long before your mind could explain it. A disturbance moved through your spirit because betrayal always creates a sound, even when it is whispered. What they did in that private conversation was not casual. It was intentional, designed, and carefully crafted to reshape the story so they could emerge as the misunderstood hero while you became the unpredictable antagonist. They used selective details, twisted memories, exaggerated emotions, and false concerns meant to look wise or compassionate. Their words were a performance, spoken slowly for maximum effect, as if each sentence were a thread weaving a new narrative to replace the real one. They spoke about your reactions, but never their provocations. They described your boundaries, but called them emotional extremes. They talked about your silence, but ignored the pain they caused. They painted themselves as the calm one, the rational one, the victim who survived your imagined storms. This is how narcissists rewrite history, not through truth, but through performance. Not through understanding, but through manipulation. Not through honesty, but through hidden conversations where the audience is unaware. They are being recruited into a false story. What they failed to recognize is that every lie carries a weight. Every distortion creates a debt. Every insult spoken in private becomes a seed planted in soil that does not forget. When they delivered that message about you, they opened a spiritual door they were not prepared to walk through. The energy behind their words was not neutral. It carried intention. It carried desire for control. It carried a hunger to be admired and believed. And heaven responds to intention long before it responds to appearance. People may have applauded them for their calm tone or their convincing explanations, but the spiritual realm listens only to truth. It knows what was hidden beneath the smile. It knows what was disguised as concern. It knows exactly what they were trying to accomplish by reshaping your identity into something that served their ego. You were never meant to be their shield, their emotional sponge, their reputation fixer, or their silent scapegoat. But they had grown comfortable using your kindness as a stage where they could stand taller while pushing you lower. When you stepped away from their chaos, they felt their image slipping. They felt the narrative losing structure. They felt the center of attention drifting away from their control. So they acted quickly. They rushed to redefine you before anyone could see the truth for themselves. They whispered strategically. They messaged discreetly. They told half-truths decorated with false sincerity. They crafted a version of events where they were wounded and you were unstable. And for a short moment, they believed they had succeeded. Yet something unexpected happened. The same people they tried to influence began to feel uncomfortable without knowing why. The energy around the narcissist darkened slightly. Their confidence became too polished. Their explanations felt overly detailed, overly defensive, overly rehearsed. The listener began to sense that the story did not match the speaker. It is difficult for deception to maintain harmony, because lies create vibration where truth creates peace. That vibration exposes itself slowly, softly, quietly, until even the most convincing story begins to crumble from within. The person they tried to impress started noticing contradictions. They noticed how the narcissist spoke too eagerly when tearing your name apart. They noticed that your supposed instability did not match the calmness you displayed. They noticed that the narcissist's behavior did not mirror their claims. And spiritual law continued working. What was whispered in the dark began unraveling in the light. Meanwhile, the narcissist did not understand why everything suddenly felt wrong. Their confidence weakened. Their plans lost stability. The attention they were seeking slipped away. The person they tried to recruit began pulling back. Conversations felt tense. Their charm no longer produced enthusiasm. Their excuses felt weaker. This is the spiritual response when someone tries to tear down an innocent heart. The punishment is not fire falling from the sky. It is exposure carried through natural consequence. It is truth revealing itself through the quiet discomfort of those who hear the lie. It is the unraveling of the mask, the collapse of the performance, the return of the harm they released multiplied in intensity. You have been feeling a strange peace lately, a peace that does not come from understanding but from recognition. Your spirit recognizes justice when it begins to unfold. Even if your mind cannot explain it, you feel the shift. The weight that once pressed on your heart is dissolving. The confusion once placed upon your name is lifting. The fear of being misunderstood has disappeared. You are no longer carrying the emotional burden they placed upon you. It is returning to them, piece by piece, until the full weight of their deception settles on their own shoulders. This is not vengeance, it is divine balance. It is the return of spiritual energy to its rightful place. And now something even more significant is happening behind the scenes. A new revelation is forming, one they never expected. It is not about what they said, it is about what they hid. And that truth is moving toward the surface with unstoppable force. By now, the narcissist and the new supply are not just unsettled, they are unraveling. The private chat that once gave them a sense of control has now become the instrument of their own exposure. Every word typed in arrogance, every plan hatched in secrecy, every scheme meant to diminish you now rises against them with a force they cannot resist. They are watching the consequences unfold in ways that are beyond human comprehension, witnessing the collapse of relationships, opportunities, and influence that once seemed untouchable. Every door they believed would open easily now closes firmly, and every plan they thought would succeed slips through their fingers like sand. They believed themselves untouchable, but untouchable does not exist when divine protection surrounds the chosen. It is important to understand that this devastation is not chaotic or random. It is precise. It is strategic. It is a reflection of a law far greater than human law, spiritual principle that governs cause and effect in a moral universe. For every intention born of malice, every conversation spoken with venom, every hidden effort to harm another under God's covering, the law of divine reciprocity activates. It is like an echo that refuses to dissipate, returning to its origin with exponential force. The narcissist and the new supply discover, slowly and painfully, that the energy they released into the world is now acting upon them, multiplied and undeniable. They begin to notice it in small ways. First, a trusted ally who once offered unquestioning support distances themselves. A professional opportunity, previously assured, falls through inexplicably. Financial instability emerges where there was stability. They start experiencing sleepless nights, restlessness, and anxiety that feels foreign, uninvited, and overwhelming. The air feels heavier, every moment carries tension, and their previously controlled world teeters on the edge of collapse. It is the universe's invisible hand, correcting the imbalance they attempted to create. But it is not only external circumstances that confront them. It is the internal confrontation, the mirror of their own conscience, reflecting every dark motive, every envious thought, every whispered attack. Pride that once fueled them now blinds them to solutions. Ego that once emboldened them now intensifies their fear. Every secret they believed safe becomes a weight pressing against their mind and spirit. And in this growing tension, their frustration turns to desperation. Desperation to panic, and panic to complete disorientation. Meanwhile, you continue to move through life with stability, confidence, and peace. Every day is a silent testimony of protection. Every decision guided by clarity that the narcissist and the new supply cannot comprehend. You do not need to fight back. You do not need to retaliate. You do not need to strategize. Your life, grounded in purpose and covenant, is untouched by their attempts. Where they planned, you prosper. Where they whispered, you walk openly in favor. Where they plotted, you rest in the assurance of divine orchestration. And the contrast is starker visible, divide between the chaos they manufactured and the calm that surrounds your life. The turning point comes subtly at first, like the tide gently revealing rocks beneath the surface. The narcissist notices that attempts to manipulate others against you fail repeatedly. The new supply notices that the comparisons they made to elevate themselves collapse under the weight of your authenticity. Even those who once followed the narrative they crafted begin to see discrepancies, inconsistencies, and signs of hidden motives. The private chat they thought would remain confidential now leaks into the consciousness of those capable of discerning truth. Their own words, intended to harm, become evidence of their malicious intent. And as this realization sinks in, it is accompanied by a dread that grows with every heartbeat, a recognition that the unseen forces governing moral order are aligning against them. Their devastation is compounded because they cannot simply point to coincidence. They cannot explain the timing. They cannot rationalize the losses. Every attempt to regain control is met with resistance. Every effort to reconstruct influence is undermined. And every gesture to protect their reputation is exposed as insufficient. In moments of reflection rare and uncomfortable, they sense a pattern they cannot deny. Their private chat about you did not just reveal plans to harm, it triggered forces that they never had the authority to control. What they released into the world returned with interest, magnified by the very intentions they hoped would remain secret. At the same time, there is a spiritual dimension they cannot perceive. Where they see setbacks, God sees intervention. Where they see obstacles, God sees protection. Where they see personal loss, God sees the restoration of balance. The narrative that once belonged to them, the story they attempted to write over yours, is now being rewritten in ways that align with purpose, truth, and covenant. And this rewriting is unstoppable because it flows from a source infinitely greater than human manipulation. Even in the midst of their unraveling, they continue to underestimate the depths of their error. They fail to grasp that your peace, your influence, your stability is not rooted in circumstance or human effort. It is anchored in divine authority. Every step they take against you only deepens the very consequences they hope to avoid. Every whisper, every plan, every scheme acts like fuel to a fire they cannot extinguish. And every time they attempt to reassess, they find new fractures opening in places they once considered safe. It is at this point that their fear evolves into complete awareness. The narcissist recognizes the limits of their control and experiences a stark confrontation with reality. The new supply, once confident in their ability to compete, feels exposed to a magnitude of authority they cannot navigate. The private chat that they thought empowered them now becomes the record of their undoing. They begin to see that in every effort to harm you, they were, in fact, undermining themselves. Every negative intention, every envious thought, every malicious plan was, unknowingly, a blueprint for their own collapse. And yet, this season is not about revenge, it is about revelation. It is not about punishment alone, it is about exposing the natural law of spiritual accountability. Their devastation serves as a warning, a mirror, and a record. It shows the consequences of operating in secrecy against what is protected. It highlights the difference between life rooted in manipulation and life rooted in purpose. It illuminates the power of truth, the resilience of integrity, and the divine shielding that cannot be broken by human scheming. Meanwhile, your life moves forward. The quiet victories, the unnoticed blessings, the subtle confirmations of protection, they accumulate into an undeniable testimony. Where they fail, you flourish. Where they panic, you rest. Where they falter, you rise. And as this continues, the world begins to see the contrast. One life disrupted by pride and malice. Another life sustained by purpose, covenant, and divine favor. Every day becomes a living illustration that attempts to destroy what is covered, only destroy the destroyer. Ultimately, the private chat that sparked their confidence becomes the catalyst of their ruin. What they thought was power becomes proof of impotence. What they thought was strategy becomes evidence of exposure. What they thought was control becomes the instrument of their own breakdown. And all the while, your life stands as a fortress, unshaken, uncompromised, and untouchable. The lesson is profound and unavoidable. Schemes against the chosen do not prosper. Private attacks, whispered intentions, and hidden malice rebound with force far greater than the perpetrator imagines. Justice, when measured through divine law, is neither rushed nor delayed. It is inevitable, precise, and comprehensive, and those who attempt to circumvent it discover, too late, that their actions only secure their own devastation.